Hello, everyone. I'm Deep Medhi, organizer of the SKC Science and Technology webinar series. Today, it's my pleasure to have Professor Kalai Mathee. She is back again after a 6 months gap. She talked about COVID-19 in this series 6 months ago, back in December. And this time, she's going to talk about COVID-19 in India, the vaccines, drugs, bugs, and black fungus. She is a very scholarly work she does, and she's expertise in molecular microbiology. And she's a professor at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Professor Mathee to talk about about this topic and to share with us. As we say, the format of this webinar series is more like a fireside chat. So it is a bit informal, purposefully, so that it's for a broader audience. You can ask questions by, on the chat, and then, at some point, you could also unmute it, but I suggest that you just, let me know first so that it's easier to manage that part. So with that, take it away, Kalai.
Thank you, Professor Mathee. I really deeply appreciate you bringing me back here. Good morning or good evening to all the audience who are here, was there before and is back again for more. And so I will one thing I would like to let you know is that do please interrupt, but if you put it in the chat, Professor Mathee will interrupt me, and I wish please do leave because that will be more interactive.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you. So here's a quick outline. I will, throughout the talk, I'll give a quick update from the previous presentation, and then we'll talk about SARS-CoV-2 vaccines approved in India and their efficacy, and figure out, is India alone in her choices? And I think that of interest to most of us is all these various variants, including Delta variant. We'll talk about that and dive into where is India today or yesterday based on my record, and how to deal with the vaccine shortage. And then I want to get into number of drugs that are being recommended to be used or not recommended, but still being used. Then get into, finally, I'll end the talk with black fungus, which is again very much on everyone's mind these days. So first of all, I want to tell you that I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not authorized to give you any medical advice. You should listen. I wouldn't say you should listen. You should know what is right and wrong, but I can certainly tell you where to find the right things, not some fake news. Okay, so with that, so this is a recap. Remember, the vaccine is not against COVID. The vaccine is against the virus, which is SARS-CoV-2, and the disease is the COVID-19. So let's try and keep this definition straight. And we have talked about all the various symptoms. The main common is dry cough, fatigue, fever, and muscle ache, and loss of smell in some people. It is uncommon symptoms. And then, of course, severe symptoms includes shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, and you start coughing up blood. And really, that's because of your injury of your lung tissues, and a persistent chest pain and pressure. Give me one second. And so again, this image you already seen. This is the virus. And we will come back to its genome, or it's a chromosome, which is made up of RNA. The genome material on us, human and most eukaryotic systems, it's a DNA, whereas this virus has a RNA as its chromosome. It has its consequences, and we'll talk about it later. And most of the vaccines that are made to the spike protein on the virus that covers the virus outside the virus, because that's the protein that makes contact with the host receptor. There's more than one host receptor. Here is suffice to know that one of them is ACE2, where the virus spike protein attaches in order to gain entry into the host. Where are we now with the COVID-19 burden? And you could see India is somewhat moderate, but it says it's decreasing. I hope that's a good news. But in terms of high incidence and increasing, US, Mexico, and certainly all of Southeast Asia, most of Southeast Asia, I shouldn't say all of Southeast Asia. But what about the hotspots? The hotspots again, the hotspots are in South America, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and certainly Malaysia is currently hotspot. So is UK. So if you're planning to travel, I would say don't. Anyway, most countries won't let you come in even if you want to go. What are the total cases and deaths? This is globally. We have 191 million confirmed cases, about 4 million confirmed deaths, and you can see based on the large circles where the most cases are and most deaths are. And US is number 1, India is number 2, Brazil is number 3. These are the numbers. In India, there's about 1.1 million cases. There is 1 in 44, which is still pretty good in terms of ratio, whereas in the US is 1 in 10. And then if you look at the deaths, US still leads, followed by Brazil, and then you can see that India is catching up. I think it will catch up quite soon if we don't stop it. We have seen this before, so I don't want to get into it. All remember there were 4 phase trials, 1, 2, and 3. And usually this takes about 10 years, but for reasons I explained the last pass, the trials, the things moved fast, but with the caution. Most vaccines that are under use are cleared phase 3 trials or still undergoing phase 3 trials. And then you get this approval to use the emergency use of the vaccine before we do the phase 4, because phase 4 will be one going for a couple of more years. So this is what I showed you back then, 6 months ago. At that point, we had only 2 vaccines approved for full use, and one was abundant. Where are we now? And look at these numbers. There's 44 here. Right now, we have 53 in phase 1. 5 have been abundant. 8 has been approved for full use. And which are the 8? Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, and then there are 4 from China, CanSino, Sinopharm has 2 versions, Wuhan and Beijing version, Sinovac, and of course the Russian version, the Sputnik.
So unless you're going to talk about it, Kalai, is that I presume you are going to talk about the different form of the vaccines or how it is done a little bit later.
Yeah, I will.
Great,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I will come to the Indian vaccines and then we'll talk about what they are. So this again, when we had, these were the leading vaccines. Since then, Bharat Biotech has joined these leading vaccines, and they all are different kinds of vaccine. This is Spikevax, Sputnik, Covishield, and Covaxin. Covishield, same as scientifically similar to AstraZeneca's vaccine. One of the things that I want to caution you when we talk about efficacy, who were these vaccines tested on, right? And so it's important because we are all genetically different. If in the USA, even though it is fairly a mixed community, the large number of participants tested were whites. and Russia is 100% Russians. We were all Caucasians. When if you take India, I couldn't get a better picture, but that shows you how many different ethnic groups are there, and each ethnic groups would react to the vaccine differently. You know, how a northerner react to a particular vaccine would be very different from somebody from the south. Having said that, there are 13 vaccines on clinical trial in India. I don't want to go through the list, but you can certainly see Covishield, Covaxin, Sputnik, AstraZeneca. They all are still undergoing a phase 3 trial in India. Having said that, these are the 5 vaccines that have been approved to use in India by Indian government. That is Moderna, Oxford AstraZeneca, the Serum Institute of India, Bharat Biotech, and the Gamaleya Russian vaccine. What do we know?
Kalai, one question is that once the country does the approval, WHO also goes over the approval, right? Process. Does that matter for the country, or how does it work, I guess?
No, it does matter. It definitely matters because you want validation of the choice of vaccines, and I will have a couple of slides to talk about that. Yes, WHO, it also enters WHO COVAX list of vaccines to use. And of course, you know, we also look towards CDC and Public Health England and other agencies, how their reactions to these vaccines, to give some level of confidence in the choice of vaccines, right? But except I can tell you that, like I said, Bharat Biotech has added to the list of leading vaccines. So just to give you where are these Moderna? Moderna had 7 phase 3 trials, and they all are in the Caucasian, mostly in the Caucasian population, US, Canada, and Switzerland. How about Oxford Zeneca? The vaccine is the AZD122, 8 phase 3 trials, and the Indian trial only has 1,600 individuals. It's a very small number, but nevertheless, we have that. Serum Institute of India, it's a Covishield. It's only 1 phase 3 trial, and again, the number of subjects is very small. Bharat Biotech, Covaxin, 2 phase 3 trials. The first one was a very small number. The second one is a very large number, over 25,000 subjects. Russia had, Sputnik had 6 phase 3 trials, including all these countries, which includes India. I don't know how many individuals are enrolled in India.
So which one out of that is the largest trial?
Right now is Bharat Biotech, Covaxin.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that has the most subjects. And it is an ongoing trial recognized by NIH as well. So we did talk about ad nauseum on these various types of vaccines. The last time we met, remember there is live attenuated, where the vaccine is just a virus or a bacteria that no longer cause infection, but it still can colonize. And then there is inactivated, where you take the whole organism, you boil it and make it inactivated protein mash. So Covaxin is an inactivated vaccine. And subunit vaccines, where you just take a protein, like just taking a spike protein just by itself and giving it as a vaccine. Or this vectored vaccine, you take the subunit and you insert it into a virus that is non-infectious, and then introduce it into your body, and then the protein is made via DNA that enters your nucleus of your cells. That is AstraZeneca, Covishield, Sputnik. They all are what I call them fraternal triplets. They are very similar, just that there is slight difference in the choice of the virus they use. Moderna, as you know, it is the 21st century vaccine, which is just as uses mRNA. They also call it Spikevax. I don't think Spikevax has caught up yet. It is the mRNA vaccine. So that is the most recent vaccine that has been introduced, which we can talk about why I really love that whole technology. All right, so in terms of delivery doses, so I'm going to focus on these 5 vaccines that have been approved in India. All of them require 2 doses, and the second dose is anywhere to 3 to 4 weeks. Sputnik is 3 weeks. However, since with the shortage of vaccine, they have increased the interval from 4 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks now, and it appears that you can still works. And one of the things
So
that
was there some basis for being able to extend that window from first?
Yeah.
To
So they keep checking. They give the second vaccine later and later, and if they still see the same boost,
okay,
and then it's fine. So
yep.
I think they're seeing the boost there. Remember, do you remember? When we get the first dose, we get a small boost of our immune response, and you give the second dose to get a complete, the largest
Correct.
boost and create memory cells. It appears that the second boost is working pretty good even after extending. And this is just to give you an idea what happens if you get vaccinated. This is on the left graph, the red line. If you get vaccinated, the chances of getting COVID is very low. If you don't get vaccinated, the chances are very high. And this is the Sputnik data where you get vaccinated, the chances of getting COVID is very low. The blue line are at the bottom. And then if you don't get vaccinated, the level of getting the COVID-19 is very high, and similar results for AstraZeneca, and I don't have results for the Indian vaccines.
Is there
so how,
if you can go back to that slide for a second, Kalai, that I
yeah.
mean, do you, I mean, obviously there's a slightly different pattern, which is not unexpected because there are different ways they work. Is there any conclusion you can make from looking at the pattern about those 2 vaccines? Do you have any comment on that, I guess?
Not really. All it says is that, in the early days like Sputnik, there's no difference whether you vaccinated or not. After that, it just tapers off. And what it says is that this particular one is Moderna is more efficacious than Sputnik, and we know that.
Okay, we know
right?
that.
So that is the protection is very quick with Moderna versus Sputnik. So in fact, you can see that in these numbers, right? When you have taken any of these vaccines, how efficacious, that means how much protection one would get. You think about it, let's say if I make this a 80%, that means more than likely 2 out of 10 people, the vaccine may not work. That's basically what it implies, right? And they all are quite low. Bharat Biotech, AstraZeneca is in the 70s or close to 80s. I could not get a number for Covishield, but since the last time, Sputnik appears to do better. And Moderna, we always known that it was highly efficacious, just like the one in the previous graph. How about preventing a severe COVID? And you can see the having a vaccine substantially improves you getting sick with the severe COVID, and anywhere from 93 to 100%.
So how do they define severe COVID? Do they have some categorization, a certain threshold?
Yes, what they do is how many patients with the vaccine ended up in the ICU with the severe
ICU.
COVID.
Okay, got it.
Right. So the severe COVID is when you're hospitalized and you could also have deaths, but I don't think I have that number. But certainly those who are vaccinated, how many are getting sick or very sick, and not just sick, very sick. So that's how you get the severe COVID. So is India alone in her choices, right? And let me just quickly run through some images. This is Covaxin, and this is Bharat Biotech. Besides India, Zimbabwe, Iran, Brazil, and Mexico has approved using Covaxin. So you're not alone. And then AstraZeneca, of course, many more countries have adopted AstraZeneca, and Brazil is completely approved. They all are approved, except Norway. They have stopped it in favor of other vaccines. Sputnik, slightly fewer countries, but still India is not alone in the choices. And North America did not approve Sputnik here. And then Moderna is even fewer countries. Moderna is absolutely approved in the Northern America and Colombia and Guatemala and Europe. And of course, India and many of the Southeast Asian countries. So we're not alone. If that many countries have approved the choice of the vaccine, which means it's pretty safe, I would guess. Otherwise, you'll have lots of trouble with these countries where there are much more stringent rules to for approval. Yes, sir.
So I have a question about the approval process. I suspect the approval process may vary from one country to another country to some extent, not massively. Do you have any input or information on that aspect about?
So I have to say that I have not seen the procedures from other countries. All I can tell you is that in the US particularly, the FDA doesn't simply take the company's analysis. They take the raw data and reanalyze to make sure the numbers are correct. Okay. And I believe Public Health England does that. I wouldn't be surprised others do. In Asian countries, I think they're more to look towards how others are doing. I certainly don't know the details or the rigor India uses to approve vaccine. But I have to tell you that when they approved the Covishield and Covaxin, we did not have a very large study to show the data. But since then, it has been improved. It's just like Gamaleya. Sputnik was approved way too soon with very few number of people, and later they walked back their decision.
Right. So I presume all of them, I mean, there's a question here. Is there a check for the integrity of the raw data? I presume so. Yeah. It's a committee on pretty much in every country, right? It's not a single person looking at it to approve it. So independent.
Well, there is a committee, and then there is a layer of politics.
Okay. All right.
Right. So, and again, Russia is a good example. So the thing is, you may say, what's the point of taking the vaccine? Things are changing, the virus is mutating. Right? So I want to try and explain to you the virus evolution. As we know that the primary host or the original SARS-CoV-2 virus is from the bat. How do we know that? When we sequence all the SARS-CoV-2 virus from all origin, the human virus is closest to the bat virus. And many, bat does carry many viruses, but they're supposed to stay in the bat population. And the bats are not supposed to come in close contact with human. Of course, we encroach into their space, so we pay the price. And so it circulates in the bat. And remember, I told you the genome is RNA, which means that this RNA virus uses a protein, an enzyme, to replicate its genome. And this enzyme does not have proofreading function. What does that mean? When we write something, we go back, we read, we correct our mistakes. And our enzyme in our body, it will make the copy, it will stop, look back and say, did I make the right changes, or did I put the right bases? And then it'll go back, and if it's a wrong base, it'll remove everything and then start all over again. Whereas the RNA virus, the enzyme involved in RNA replication, doesn't care. It just goes boom, 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 boom. In the process, mistakes are made and mistakes are kept. And what happens is those viruses, they're not very fit, they will die. The fit viruses will circulate. So there are a lot of single changes we call single nucleotide polymorphism. And this virus can enter via saliva or urine or feces in the wild to wild animals. And in a pangolin, monkeys, rodents, snake, raccoons, camel, and pigs. And what is important it speaks farm animals, and when the pig farms are closer to the forest, you're going to get this virus into the pig because the bats will eat fruits and drop things, or they urinate as they fly, and you can enter the intermediate host community.
So the key thing to recognize there is that the no proofreading function, as you,
yes,
that's a really key thing about an RNA virus. I mean, but recognizing that something is an RNA virus, if you have any historic information on that, what's the first time we realized that, oh, this is the first type of, we have laboratory-wise identified as an RNA virus?
I don't know which was the first one. I can tell you the flu virus is RNA virus.
Okay, but
right, that's why we have to keep deciding what vaccine to use, because constantly the circulation changes, a mutation occurs, a new species appear that becomes more dangerous than before.
But at this point, for flu virus, there is no RNA vaccine, right? So, or at least approved one. So that's yeah. I mean, it could happen in the next couple of years. Right.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure both Pfizer and Moderna working on various vaccines that are RNA virus vaccines. They're going to put a lot of companies out of their job with the RNA vaccine. So what happens within the intermediate host? They circulate, and certainly it will kill off the susceptible population, which you'll never know, right? We're not tracking that. But what happens? It jumps to human. When it jumps to human, either by when you consume the food, or you by the saliva of the animals or the feces, you come in contact, and it enters the human population. Now it will continue to change, and it will circulate. In the process, it will kill all the susceptible hosts. And as we know already, over 3 million deaths, people are dying. And then as the SARS-CoV-2, remember, it is not advantageous to the virus to kill all the hosts if it wants to keep itself going. So eventually, we will figure out how to coexist with human. And until this happens, we're still going to lose people, but the loss will become smaller and smaller over time. And a very good example where there is a stable coexistence for most part is the pandemic flu, right? In 1918, this Spanish flu killed 50 million people across the globe. In 1918, that is 1/3 of the global population. And now we live with flu, and sooner or later we will end up just living with this virus. And of course, a vaccine will be very important in the development of coexistence.
So essentially what you are saying with any of these situations of viruses, I mean, trying to get to zero is almost impossible. And,
yes.
So, I mean, and is this where something is different than something like smallpox, for example, where we have been able to eradicate in the entire world right now?
And smallpox is also it's a DNA virus, so it's a very different virus.
Very interesting. Right, that's correct. Okay, so that makes a distinction there.
Yeah, very much. And it's almost eradicated smallpox, but here and then we have some animal pox jumping. So, but it's almost eradicated. I would say 99.9%. All right. So is SARS-CoV-2 mutating? Yes, indeed. You can see where all the various variants have been isolated. There's a very nice website that tracks all the variants that are being sequenced. The only way we will know is if we sequence the entire virus every time we isolate. And this was, start somewhere around 2020. We started sequencing the whole virus, and you can see in Asia, the rate of mutation is very high. That's, I think, simply because more people are getting infected now than other regions. And the lowest is, of course, the Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand, and those islands over there. And And you can see from the day we started sequencing how many different variants have shown up in very different places. All these different colors shows this North American variant, Delta variant. Let's look at just the 4 important variants. Here's the Delta variant, right? And here is the 2021 June. And you can see, if you look at this line, which variant is pushing through the starting appearing a lot. And you can see Delta is really pushing through the this line right here. And whereas this is very few over here, soon we may not have any of these. This is a Gamma variant, I believe, right? So this is the Delta variant. So this is a concern. Why is that? So with this kind of data, and people are watching, oh, what is this guy? Is this guy going to take over the whole set? Right? Whether this will take over all set. So we have 2 kinds of variants. That is variants of interest. We don't know what it's going to do, but we are watching these variants. And these are a bunch of them, and including one in India. Because the variants, when you say India variant, it gives India a bad name. It's very stigmatizes the India. So this community decided to call them, give them Greek name. And you can see epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, and kappa. And US, there are 2 variants are circulating in California and in New York, 2 different variants. So we are observing it. We are watching these variants and see whether they become problematic in future. And then there is variants of concern. That is the alpha variant, which is the first one that appeared in UK and all over the world. And the South African variant, beta. And then there is one that's circulating in Brazil. There's a gamma variant. And this delta variant is, of course, started in India. And now it has spread in quite a lot of places, and it's increasing.
So what defines a variant? I mean, what is the significantly, it has to be different from, let's say, alpha to beta to gamma.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of a gap that you define, certain, scientific way, obviously?
So obviously the Delta variant has a certain sequence change, and Delta variant, I think, has 2 sequence change that are critical. It has many sequence changes, but 2 that seems to be very critical. But why do we, all the variants have changes, right? Why are we interested in the Delta variant?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can tell you here, right?
Okay, good.
The main thing is here, because in the original strain, you get exposed. In 6 days, you get sick. The original strain can infect about 3 people. And then the alpha variant, what we see is that it infects more people. The Delta variant, the incubation number of days is dropped to 4 days. You get sick. More importantly, it is very infectious, and it is infection rate is about 1 in 6, right? So 6 people compared to only infecting 1 or people, and you end up infecting more than 6 people. And the other thing is that this Delta variant also replicates much faster. And so the viral load appears to be more than 1,000-fold higher than the alpha variant in a patient. So the viral load increasing, that means if I were to make an educated guess, the enzyme is moving much faster, right? So it's making more copies much faster. And that helps the virus load to increase. Right? So when you make copies much faster, make all the proteins necessary, then you make more viruses. So a patient infected with the Delta variant can infect more people, 1 person, and the amount of virus is a lot, and you have only 4 days incubation. We thought in the past, we can have, like, for example, the original strain, if we vaccinate 67% of the community, you can have the herd immunity. With this Delta variant, you have to at least vaccinate 83% of the community.
So one thing you if I look at your picture and the color, you said the blue ones are immune. So are you suggesting that the Delta variant, although it is spreading faster to 6, but only one of them is could be infected out of the 6.
Right.
That's what it's saying. So, but
Right,
infection
exactly.
rate is less, although it is,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a subtle distinction there, I guess. So.
Right. And then but this person can transmit to other people.
Certainly, right, and that's
So you
that's a
give it
nice
to 6.
mathematical propagation model, to
Exactly.
calculate it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So you give it to 3 people, then they spread to 3 more. You give it to 6 people, they will give it to another 6 people. It's just exponential, right? And so that's why it's a huge consensus, a very high infectious rate. One of the things that seems
other question quickly I have, Kalai, is that with the infectious rate is one aspect, but severity of the variant is also another factor, right? Unless you have a slide later to talk about that. I mean, do you have
the severity doesn't seem to change once you go to that phase of the infection. It's we'll talk about that, why the body, what causes the severity seen in the patients, right? So I'll briefly talk about that later. But one of the things that appears to be different with the Delta variant is that people feel they have a common cold. They have a runny nose and congestion, in addition to all the known symptoms. And usually when you have a congestion, runny nose, you think, you have a rhinovirus, a common cold. But now you have to be concerned. It may not be flu. It could be just COVID-19. So if you think you have a cold, I think I recommend you test and make sure it's not COVID. So how about the vaccines?
One question is that, one question then about the variant, that if it is like the variant keeps going, you go to alpha to beta to delta all the way to the last Greek alphabet, sort of, it is so variant that is it possible that it, that is resilient to a vaccine? Is that where the booster comes into play? Do you have any comment?
Yes. In fact, they already started giving booster vaccine in Israel. Because of the new variants are coming, they already started giving booster vaccine in Israel.
Okay.
Even though Israel is 100% vaccinated, right? That is one of the best record. And so they started giving booster vaccine just due to this concern over the new variants. Remember, even in flu, the appearance of very infectious, deadly new variants eventually will be noticed, just like the flu. When we had the bird flu in China and we quickly caught it and then we figured out how to contain it, it will happen. But this phase has to run its course, basically.
Okay.
This what is going on currently, it has to run its course.
Okay. There is one question I want to read it quickly. As we know, virus cannot survive outside host body. So why do virus kill human if it is not in their benefit?
It cannot survive outside the body, but it's not survive. It cannot propagate. It cannot reproduce outside the body. It can float. It can sit on the surface. But the minute it comes into the host, it can cause disease. Why does it kill the host? Because it's not, you're a new host. It has not seen the human host before. So it has to figure out how to live. Think of it as a marriage. You don't know each other, and then you figure out how to live together. And the virus needs to figure out how to coexist with the human population. And until then, it's going to say, I can't, and, people die, it will kill the virus. It's not the virus that kills you. It's your own body kills you. And I will talk about it again in a few minutes.
The other thing is that this is not a live virus, very important aspect about the coronavirus, right? So, I mean, live in the sense of, how should I say? I mean, I don't mean it in the sense of a, human species.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So it's what he meant, I think, is the virus by itself cannot virus falls into this category, is it life or not life? Because it cannot replicate on its own. It absolutely depends on a host. It's a parasite, right? It has to depend on a host, not even a parasite. It doesn't, anyway, so it you can say it can't replicate outside, so it's not a life, it's a not alive. But then it absolutely needs the host, because it doesn't have all the machinery for it to make its own. So that's why it's, and having said that, there are viruses that can replicate but still depend on the host. Okay, all right. So we already talked about the Delta variant symptoms. And so how do the vaccines work against these variants? So, for the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta, there are some clinical trials going on the various variants. Just give you an idea, the South African variant, Pfizer at 100% efficacious against this beta variant, but AstraZeneca was only efficacious in 10%. So AstraZeneca did not work with this variant, and Johnson & Johnson at 64%. So let's talk about the Delta variant, okay, which is of concern to us. So the Delta variant, we know that if you take the convalescent antibody, in other words, people already previously infected, if you take their serum, and you can neutralize this virus. We know for some of them, we have some data like Biotech can protect, Covaxin can protect at 65%. This is percentage. AstraZeneca, the second dose can protect, efficacy is 60%. And Moderna is, even with a single dose, is 72% efficacious with the Delta variant. And they all say that they protect against the Delta variant, but I could not find the numbers.
Is this from a trial, or is it just data collected as we go?
Data collected from patients, yeah.
Okay,
so it wasn't a trial, but yeah, it's a data collected based on what we have. And then let's look at the COVID-19 in India. Well, I don't have to tell you how big is your population. The deaths every day, there's about 4,000 people dying every day in India right now. It's sort of holding steady. You can see in the graph here is sort of in this range right here on the right. And the total, but this was yesterday's number, 400 and almost 500,000 people dead, 31 million people confirmed cases. They have administered 377 million doses, but how many are fully vaccinated? Very low, 6.35%. And so this is where it's the problem, right? And there are, I don't know why the percentage is low. One is the access to vaccine, the availability of vaccine, and also there are some vaccine hesitancy in some population. So because of the vaccine shortage in many places, they have increased the time interval between the first and second dose for both AstraZeneca and Covaxin, because based on data in the laboratory and some patient data, we know that increasing the time interval is fine. Then there is also recommendation to mixing with second dose. And we do have some scientific evidence. There is a small population, nevertheless, AstraZeneca mixing with the Pfizer, it certainly worked. And so UK already recommends mixing AstraZeneca and Pfizer. And you can see that, remember I told you all these vaccines, AstraZeneca, Covishield, Sputnik, and Moderna, they all target the same protein. It's just that how the protein is made in the cell is different, but they all is the same antigen or same protein. AstraZeneca Sputnik, they said a very promising results very early, because Sputnik alone didn't do too well, but they combined it with AstraZeneca and it has been very good. And then, of course, reducing the amount, recent data shows that even 1/4 of what recommended dose of Moderna still can induce a good immunity. So if you ask me, will I take a mixed vaccine? I will absolutely do so. And you can see Covaxin is the very different vaccine. If I want a complete protection, I want a Covaxin as my second dose. So, the bottom line is the vaccines are safe and effective, and it can prevent severe COVID, and they certainly provide better immunity than natural infections. If you don't have if you don't take vaccine, the death numbers, death toll will continue to increase. And certainly choice is yours, whether you want to be next to your loved one when they're dying. So with that, I want to move to COVID and drugs. Do we have any questions?
I got a question. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, before you go to drugs, about breakthrough cases? And of course, I think most people understand what breakthrough means, but you might want to explain that. And so why it happens and what we need to worry about that. Mm-hmm.
So breakthrough cases are simply due to when a new variant arises, right? And then the vaccine is see something slightly different. And then you can have a second infection. And it never be severe infections, because when the virus divides it, it will our immune system can fight a little bit better than there without the vaccine. Beyond that, I don't know what to add.
Yeah,
I can think about it.
The other thing is that, which means that basically that even if you're vaccinated, you could get, infected with the COVID, so
yes, yes.
So that goes to the whole idea of the probability that there's it's not a 100% thing, that's where the efficacy numbers appear. And then I guess the question there is that if that happens, do we need to, it is not trying to say that the vaccine doesn't work. It's only saying that the breakthroughs of cases that can happen is very, very small compared to if you're not vaccinated. Relative number is very, very small. So
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you're so right. And remember, when it says a 90% efficacy, which means that 1 in 10, the vaccine will not work. Even with the 90% efficacy, the 9 people where the vaccine worked, if they get a new variant that your immune system doesn't recognize, you will get sick, right? But you can get infected and you can still transmit without you feeling sick, but it'll be a very short period, because your body will fight and try and kill off the first wave.
The second thing is that the severity for you will be much less than if you're not vaccinated.
Yes.
That's the other important thing to kind of note from that point of view. Mm-hmm. All
Absolutely.
Right, let's hear about drugs now, okay? What's coming up?
Right. So first of all, everyone should recognize there are never a good drug for viral infections. Okay, no virus is ever a good drug. That's why when they say you get a flu or cold to stay home, there's really no drug to help you. You stay home, let your body fight it out, just don't transmit. Most drugs were developed against bacteria, and there are several drugs that are developed against virus. When COVID started becoming a huge issue, what most companies did, or a lot of scientists did, is that can we use any existing drugs to try and stop the COVID? Right? So this is the repurposing of drugs. And some of them, some have been approved for emergency use. So before we get into drugs, let's understand the COVID, right? When you get infected, your stage 1 early infection, you have a lot of virus that as the body starts to deal with early infections, the number of viruses may reduce or the severity might decrease. But what happens is, because the virus is in your body, your host, your immune system start fighting the infection. And when it starts fighting the infection, because the virus is inside the cell, our immune cells need to attack our cells in order to kill the cell, kill the virus, and kill the cell that's hosting the virus. So what are we doing? We are damaging our own cells. Our own immune system starts damaging our cells. And this is what is the host inflammatory response phase. Eventually, the reason we have pulmonary failure, you cough out blood, is because our immune system trying to remove the virus, trying to remove the infected cell and stop killing the cells around it. What I call it a collateral damage. The collateral damage is a destruction of your own tissue. Very often that's what kills the patient. Even though the virus initiated it. So how do we recover from this host immune response? Once we killed off the cells, killed off the virus, it takes time to recover from this host phase. So most drugs are trying to stop this phase or trying to reduce the level of inflammation. It's not against the virus, it's mostly against this phase where our cells are being destroyed or they're undergoing a death. So first understand that. And this is the reason where we have this severe COVID, because your cells are destroyed, you can't breathe, there's a lot of bleeding, and there is thrombosis and all kinds of subsequent a result of all these host reactions. So the first drug that was approved for use for COVID-19 is remdesivir. And there was a small clinical trial, and you can see that if you take no drugs versus drug, and what is the recovery rate? You can see it's slightly better, right? The patients with recovery with remdesivir, but sort of meet somewhere there, but slightly better, right? And the recovery is 10 days compared to 15 days, right? But it's very important that remdesivir only helps if the patient is not ventilated, and it also lowers the respiratory infection. But what happens if you're ventilated? Even if you have a non-invasive mechanical ventilation, which is you're already breathing through a machine, right? And you can see that, yes, it seems to help, but it just doesn't matter in the end, right? The final outcome is the same. But if you're already on a breathing machine, this is invasive. They stuck a tube in your throat and make it possible for you to breathe. Remdesivir does not help in the process. So remdesivir helps you to recover slightly faster, but at the end of the day, that's the only thing it can do if you have early infection. Then there are other drugs. Remember, I told you there is a lot of inflammation. It's in the process killing our own cells, our own immune system. And this inflammation, we call this a cytokine storm, because our body is so active trying to kill the cells, it releases a lot of chemicals and causes massive inflammation, which can cause death. So many anti-inflammatory agents have been recommended. There are many natural products to reduce, what is like antioxidants. Many of these products that kill our cells are oxidative radicals. So there are a lot of antioxidants out there. They recommend low radiation therapy. There's also cytokine inhibitors that prevents the cytokine that just focused on 2 of them. And then there is also acido analog or 2-DG, right? And can really suppress that cytokine storm. And then there is also recommendation of corticosteroids. But corticosteroids, you got to be extremely careful when you use steroids. And then I'm going to come back to the steroid story shortly. And then there is this ivermectin, and ivermectin is refusing to go away. There was a study that showed a lower mortality in COVID-19 patients, at a very small study that was done in Australia, I believe. And ivermectin was developed against this worm, right? This nematode, which is Onchocerca volvalis. And Onchocerca volvalis causes river blindness. And you either get a single dose of this drug against this worm, and or you get series of small doses. And you know, in the lab, this drug can inhibit replication of dengue, Zika, yellow fever, and many viruses. However, even in the lab, you need to 10 times higher dose to see an effect against SARS-CoV-2, right? And this is a problem because this particular drug causes neurotoxicity. That means it can cross the blood-brain barrier, and then it can cause hallucination. It can cause all kinds of neurological problems. Because of that, there has been no appetite for clinical trials. It's only approved for river blindness or for use in animals, not for humans. FDA, that US FDA, completely tells people never to use ivermectin. And if you're found to use ivermectin in this country, you might get into trouble. That is in the US because it's not recommended. Corticosteroids. There are, you know, you have dexamethasone, you can also have this. This is again to prevent organ dysfunction and lung injury. Remember, I talked about lung injury due to inflammation. So it can prevent organ dysfunction. There were 7 clinical trials, and what they recommend is for systemic or intravenous oral 7 to 10 days in patients with severe and critical COVID-19, because we want to help them recover. Remember, our system has already destroyed a lot of our tissues, right? It's not to use in patients with non-severe COVID-19, and definitely not to use for diabetic patients, right? So these 2 things are extremely important. Let's talk about diabetes, right? So diabetes is, in India used to be the diabetes capital. Now is China is the diabetes capital. And here's the number of people that already have diabetes is 116 million people in China. And there are 77 million people in India. There are 30 million people in the US, and of course, 3 million in Malaysia. And if you look at the deaths in India, there are about 1 million deaths related to—
1 million deaths a year with diabetes in
yeah.
India? Wow, very high number. I didn't know
very
that.
high number.
Yeah.
In fact, this is again reported and tested, right? So you have to remember
Correct,
that.
right. Unreported, we don't even know, right? Yeah.
You don't even know. And India is notorious for unreported cases, right? And we know that, you know, even though there are high deaths, because of the Indian population size, it's only 1 in 11 people have diabetes. And China 1 in 9, US is 1 in 8, and Malaysia 1 in 6. And of course, Malaysia has 33 million people, period, right? It's 1/3 of the people with the whole population is 1/3 of the people with diabetes. But you have to remember, sometimes you can't imagine, what do you mean by 77 million? That's about 7 crores in Indian number. Think about it. Assam has about 3 crores population, right? 30 million people.
But a
Tamil
lot of
Nadu
them are
has,
young. A lot of them are young.
all of them are young.
So
and
less than 20 years
Tamil
old.
Nadu, right? And Tamil Nadu has about 78 crores of people. Imagine the entire state of Tamil Nadu has diabetes. Essentially, what that means, right? So you have to get the number in context.
Perspective.
So there's a lot of people with the diabetes in India, okay? But 1 in 11. So what happens? So there is unholy trinity where we have a large population with diabetes, diagnosed,
okay,
undiagnosed, right? And then you have irrational use of steroids. people simply prescribing steroid as soon as you come in with COVID. So the doctors are simply doing it without any evidence base, right? And then because of this suppression of immune system by the steroid, you are prone to get infections that usually doesn't cause infections, but now they can cause infections, what we call opportunistic infection. And then because of COVID-19, there are lower immune cells, lymphopenia, and there's a lot of damage, which means this your epithelial cell is open, it's bleeding, it's acidic. All these causes black fungus. This is perfect environment. The spores that are usually found in the air doesn't do anything. Now it has found a medium to sporulate and start growing. So what is black fungus? Is a Rhizopus oryzae, the scientific name. And this scientific disease called the mucormycosis. And this mucormycosis is a very rare disease. It was recognized, and in about 1 in million people get this disease. However, when you look at the occurrence of mucormycosis, black fungus is the highest in India, 80% higher in India than compared to any other countries. And when does it happen? When there is a fungal overgrowth, and here's the fungus grown on a medium, and you can see these tiny black dots. That's basically these guys, and this is the spores, the black spores, and that's why they call the black fungus or black death. It's different from plague, but this is due to the spores. And I told you earlier, the low oxygen, very high glucose because of your diabetes, and a very acidic medium because of diabetes, as well other metabolic processes going on. In addition, there is a breakdown of the cells, bleeding. If you bleed, there is a lot of iron in your blood. All these contributes to the spores to germinate. And based on a very limited reports, we know that it's mostly affecting male. So 79% of the cases are male, and it's mostly in India, but 80% of the cases of black fungus in India. And this black fungus can cause disease both in people with the active COVID as well as people already recovered. But again, it's 40%, and these are the reason, one of the reason is because of these diabetics. And in India, the most cases appears to be in Maharashtra and Gujarat at this point. What are the symptoms? You have swelling, pain, and drooping eyelids, and over time you lose your eyesight. And if you see the images of black fungus, you see most people are losing their eyesight, and it can also get very stuffy and bleeding nose, and you start seeing the spores under your skin, these black patches. And in cases where the fungus is growing very fast under your skin, you start seeing black coloration, and that is what is the reason they call it the black fungus. Other drugs, yes, there are few fungal drugs, not too many compared to bacteria and virus. And the recommended drug is amphotericin B that works on the fungal membrane, but it has lots of side effects. However, if you don't treat them, you have to have 100% mortality. But in cases where the fungus is overgrown in your body, the only way to remove them is to amputate parts of your body. Okay, so amputation is a real thing for black fungus. So in order to protect from black fungus in future or now, lower the amount of glucose levels in your blood, right? Reduce sugar, eat healthy. Lose weight. Losing weight allows you to drop this blood glucose level very quickly. Consult your doctor, of course, but the most important thing, don't get COVID. Get vaccinated, mask up, and wash your hands all the time. All right. Okay, so this is where I finish with the drugs.
Great, excellent.
And I have one more slide before I end. How are we doing with time? We're doing time good.
Yeah,
okay.
We're just about an hour, a little over an hour, so about to wrap it up then. So
okay,
we can open up for your question. Yeah.
All right, so these two slides are basically, there are a lot of misinformation online, right? And there are a link here to what are the 50 frequently forwarded COVID-19 fake messages. WhatsApp culture is, it's really, it's hard to keep digital sanity and dignity. It has lots of issues. However, I want to caution people with trigger fingers. Just because you like a video, it doesn't mean everybody likes it. Just because you see something that's good, it doesn't mean it is real. So stop forwarding messages. And if you still feel like you must forward, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but verify, fact check whether this is real or not. Figure out who is sending this video. Are they looking at, oh, she is more into this kind of things, so I'm going to send. Remember the Google and Facebook and WhatsApp, all these programs are gathering information about you and your interests, and they will start sending you things that they think you are interested in. And definitely ask experts, people but there are many websites online that allows you to do fact check, right? Every time you have something, you either fact check the video or fact check the content. And it's very easy to do. After I gave my last presentation saying that don't use ivermectin, and one of the attendees sent me, please ask Dr. Mathee. She said she's not recommending ivermectin. Here is a World Health Organization approved kit. It's completely a fake kit, okay? Well, anybody can copy and paste the logo. And this group has copy and pasted the World Health Organization, and is also giving ivermectin. And I want to emphasize that the side effects of ivermectin is not something to ignore. And neurological events, you have facial and limb swelling, you can have sudden drop in blood pressure, that is not very good. You can also cause liver injuries. So please, even I heard a case where people are beginning to prescribe ivermectin in India. I hope somebody stops them. So this is a summary, a quick update. I talked about the approved vaccines in India, and we talked about the evolution of variants, the status of vaccination status in India. Briefly, we discussed some of the antivirals that's floating, and I hope I gave you some idea why black fungus is a problem. Please fact check before you send things to other people. And with that, thank you so very much for listening to me, and thank you so very much, Professor Mathee, for hosting me. I will stop here and take questions.
Very good. Thank you, Professor Mathee. So I will read one question I saw on the Facebook Live, and then we'll go back to Zoom. It says that we can see some news in social media messages that children are infected or will be hugely impacted by the Delta variant. Is that sort of true for in terms of with the Delta variant and children?
So we still don't have sufficient data yet. And that's because children are not vaccinated, so we are seeing them getting infected. I don't think we even know how severe it is. It seems like, at least from my basic knowledge, it's not super severe, but I can get back to you on that point. Yeah, and as a result, several of the vaccines companies have started vaccine trial for 2012 and older individuals. But the problem is children will transmit, if the Delta, as you know, Delta variant is highly infectious. Even if the child is not very sick, he or she can give it all the adults in the house. Because we often, people don't even mask the children up, and which is really silly.
Right.
But
yeah. One other question is that why do those who vaccinated, if they get COVID, have only a less severe disease than, those who are not vaccinated? What's the science behind it?
They're very simple. Remember, when you have a vaccination, your body creates a vaccine, creates antibodies. And it also creates information, memory of that particular vaccine. for that particular protein in its immune system. So when the virus comes in, the cavalry, our immune cells, the early immune cells recognize, hey, this guy shouldn't be here. And we have seen this person before. So let me call my army or my military to come and attack it right away. So this is the level of recognition is much faster. When you get the virus without vaccine, the body has to process the virus, then create memory, then create the military to attack it. But in the case of vaccination, if you're vaccinated, our body already has the memory, so it doesn't have to process. The processing step is much quicker. Hey, we have seen it before. We recognize this part of this virus and then immediately call the military to attack.
Very good. One other question is that whether you are willing to share your slides. So is that possible?
Well, we do put it on the YouTube and Facebook, and all the slides are already there. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see, anybody else have any other questions? I do have one question, so which is that the question is about the drug, developing new drug, even that we know enough information about the virus as well as the variant. Obviously, we know new variants may come in. So, but the drug development, a new drug to develop in the process takes a long time, right? First in the lab itself to go where it is, and then from the approval process to FDA or WHO. Can you give a general sense of how the drug development process, how long it takes? Do you have any information on that?
Oh, yes. Some information. Again, it's a little
very
bit
high
old,
level
but
information.
yeah, it is. It's many companies spend billions of dollars to develop a drug, and it takes 10 years, 15 years to develop a drug, and then the drug's approved, and then somebody gets sick. Then immediately the drug doesn't work, or they stop the drug use. And many bacteria, including viruses, they develop resistance. So they spent billions of dollars to develop this drug, and then suddenly the drugs are useless. So many companies has gone out of developing new drugs because it's the rate at which they have to start looking for new drugs becomes a problem. And because of that, they are recommending a lot of grassroots level research of people to develop research in the lab to identify potential candidates. And then, it costs less for labs to develop and test, but in the end, it has to go through the rigorous animal testing, human testing, and all that stuff. Even after that, it's
a very
hard
long
to develop.
Process.
A long process. It's very hard to develop drugs against viruses, particularly because it's a virus that grows inside the cell. So it's an intracellular pathogen. It's always hard to have drugs. And a very good example is a TB, right? TB it's an intracellular pathogen. And we have been, though there is some promising news coming through for some new drugs for TB, which can be a single dose. So we'll see, yeah.
Okay, so one more interesting question. I think we visit this back and forth once in a while, which is that, there's always this rumor that SARS-CoV-2, was created in the lab. Did not come from natural process. Would you like to comment on that? And maybe with that, we'll conclude this session today. So
yeah, I really don't believe it's human made. Right, I do believe it is circulating in bat, but whether why would, even if China made it, why would it want to kill its own people even at that number? I don't see the point. But again, the jury is out. You're always going to have people saying it was man-made and some people saying it natural. And I think there's no way to prove one way or the other. So why for me is it's wasted a lot of energy trying to address that question. Let the experts figure that one out, and we don't have to worry about that. We have more things and more important things to worry about: your own health, your family's health, and making sure you take care of things, because there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And
right.
I always say that if there's nothing you can do to make a difference or change, don't waste your time and energy worrying about it.
And you might actually think about how to fix it, right, for the next time, or whatever it is there. So take care of the protection. Well, it was been very, very informative. Really, really enjoyed. I always enjoy talking with you, Kalai. So thank you for joining today. And with that, we'd like to conclude today's session.
And once again, thank you. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you all the participants who made it here. This seems like we have a lot of participants, not just from your group. I see Malaysians and I see people from this part of the world in the US. Thank you for joining me. I truly appreciate that. And with that, I shall bid goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.